So, ladies and gentlemen, Cabinet Minister of Culture, Mélanie Joly from Canada. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. Thank you, John. Great introduction.
Yeah, maybe say a little bit about the role you play as Minister of Culture, and what are the things you get to think about, and how does that relate to augmented reality? I asked her, do you have an augmented reality strategy? And she said, of course we do. And she wasn't lying, and she's going to say some stuff.
Okay, thank you. So, I am the Minister of Canadian Heritage. Does that mean I am in charge of the equivalent of the FCC, which is the CRTC. I'm in charge of the arts and culture sector, the CBC, Radio-Canada, which is the equivalent of BBC. We have a public broadcaster. So also everything in line with official languages, because in Canada we have 2 official languages, English and French, Indigenous languages and cultures, and as well as our multiculturalism strategy and, well, actually policy. All that to say, the cultural sector, so film, books, music, television, and also the media sector is undergoing a huge disruption. And so that's why we're really looking into the problem, and we launched our first federal policy on culture. And all linked to that is, what's the future of production of content? What's the future of distribution of content? How can we make sure that Canadian artists and storytellers have access to great markets around the world? How can storytelling, while there's a global hunt for story, be supported in Canada, but also known across the world? And meanwhile, we tackle questions such as net neutrality. So what's the importance of net neutrality for us as a government? It's extremely high, but we put that principle next to the other one, which is cultural diversity, making sure that different voices on the web are heard, and that the wave of cultural content, which is usually much more English-speaking and American, is of course an important part of our own pop culture in Canada, but that there are places for Francophone content, there are places for Indigenous content, and also minority groups.
Yeah. So I didn't Google Canadian artists or actors, but I'm a big fan of Star Trek, and I know William Shatner's from Canada.
And Montreal.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if I'm, Michael J. Fox, Justin Bieber, is he from?
Yeah, we have a couple of famous Justins.
Yeah. So with you have artists creating bodies of work, all that stuff can be digitized. VR, you put a toaster on your head, you kind of go off to another place. AR is where you connect with the physical world and you have digital information on it. And I think it would be great to see a country such as yours really prioritize doing creative things with content. And in your role, what resources do you have to facilitate that? And at a time when I think if you look at the U.S., net neutrality, I don't know if you guys read the U.S. papers, but things seem to be, you guys are doing one thing, U.S. is doing another thing. What resources do you have to do to be a leader, to show what's possible, and to have success stories that can innovate around this?
Well, there's 2 things. First, in our new federal policy on culture, we added new formats to support VR, to support AR, and to support new mediums, which was not necessarily the case. Of course, in Canada, we have the equivalent of the National Endowment, so the Canada Council for the Arts. And that is, we just doubled their budget. They used to have $180 million. They will now have $360 million per year to support our artists and all. But we're really making sure to put arts and technology together in order ultimately to support people that are just creating in other ways. So that thinking that you guys have here, or that there is in Silicon Valley, took a lot of time to be part of our policy making. But for the Trudeau government, it's extremely important to be in line with how society is evolving and how can we modernize our entire policy making to be at the forefront of change. And so that's what we are doing. If you're thinking especially about AR, well, clearly the spending and development of AR is happening in Canada. By 2020, the sector will have grown by 225%.
So you've tracked it in Canada?
Yeah, we're tracking it in Canada. And
do you know what it is for the U.S. or you guys?
no, I don't have that.
Okay.
I don't have that data.
Yeah.
You should have. You should invite American politicians.
Yeah.
But of course they would come. I'm
Sure.
convinced. I met a couple of them, and also Vancouver just launched its first equivalent of AR/VR media lab.
So what keeps you up at night, and who would you like to collaborate with? I've hired a lot of talented people from Canada, University of Waterloo, Simon Fraser, Queen's, some real talented technicians, engineers, scientists, researchers, University of Toronto. So I know there's talent up there. What keeps you up at night, and what kind of partnerships would be helpful? Because there may be some people here that would want to work with you.
Okay, there's two things to your questions. First, we're very strong in AR, VR, but also AI. Yep. So we have Joshua Banjo in Montreal, the people in Toronto, at U of T also, and in Winnipeg. And we just launched
Steve Mann, who spoke last year at this conference.
Exactly.
At U of T. Yeah.
And we just launched a multi-million strategy to support AI. And we've seen also big platforms investing in AI in Montreal and Toronto and Winnipeg. So anybody here interested, of course, we're always seeking for the best talent up north.
So last year there was a lady who came here from like southern Australia, and she was walking around saying, if you do a startup in Australia, we'll like pay a lot for you, like housing or give you tons of tax breaks. I don't know if that doesn't sound like the department you're in, but I remember she was mining this event for people to come. I don't know if she was successful.
We have good programs as well. And
but I think collaboration is going to be important, and I think just the fact that you're here shows that. ARiA, AR in Action, I don't know if you see it, it's kind of subtle, but there's an IA in there that could be artificial intelligence. I like to call it assisted intelligence, but I do think AR plus IoT, plus AI, plus robots, plus drones, plus voice, that it's the hyphen, and that for some of these emerging technologies, these big trends, AR is going to be a key interface, and I'm glad that someone like you is here, someone like you is valuing this, and I hope some good opportunities come from this collaboration. Yeah. And I know you used to be.
You asked me one last question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You asked me what kept me up at night.
What keeps you up? Yeah.
So, as the Minister of Culture, I believe in the importance of cultural diversity, and so how can we make sure that we have? So first, what's the future of the internet? What's the social contract on the internet? How can people have access to different opinions, different types of content? How can we preserve languages across the world? How can we preserve culture? This is a subject that is very emotionally and psychologically charged. People, there's a famous quote about of Churchill, and one of his ministers came to him during the World War and said to him, well, Prime Minister, we need to cut funding to the arts. And Churchill said, so why are we fighting? What are we fighting for? And ultimately, the future of the web must take into account the fact that there are cultural policies that support artists in different countries, and that people must have access to that art, and that languages must be preserved. Because if that's not the case, that will create disruption, and that eventually will create conflict. So I'm here to meet with people and also talk with academics and talk with the sector about how can we ultimately make sure that there's cultural diversity on the web, and how can we ensure that the web is a progressive force that can ensure our social cohesion in our democratic world.
Great, well put.
So that keeps me up.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you're a champion for that, and I sleep well knowing that you're on that.
Thank you, John.
In 1988, I had the opportunity to travel from one coast to the other coast of Canada, and Bill 101 was going on, Meech Lake Accord. I saw the reenactment of Louis Riel's trial in Manitoba. And I do think Canada is an interesting country where you have this bilingual identity. And I think at a time where I think we're trying to figure out what does diversity mean on a global scale. You guys are a microcosm of some of that diversity. You have a lot of folks from Asia coming, and immigration, as people are talking about that. And I think the architecture of the internet and the tools to create and express are going to become more and more important in terms of national identity. And I'm glad you're on the case. And we're going to do a bunch of these conferences. Be on the lookout for talent that should present here. Be on the lookout for talent that should present in the exhibition space. And if you'd like us to have an ARiA conference in Canada and want to help facilitate that, I'm open to that. So thank you.
Thank you, John.
And good luck with your aspirations.
Thank you.